The story returns to the paradox that opened everything. The person we chased was never the destination. They were the doorway into our own unfinished emotional history. When we look closely, the intensity of longing often dissolves into something quieter, something recognizably old, shaped by patterns that taught us to confuse distance with meaning. As Sue Johnson notes, in her work on attachment repair, the pull toward the unavailable softens when the earlier wounds that shaped it finally receive attention rather than reenactment. The narration slows, shifting from analysis to recognition. You see that the silence you once interpreted as mystery was simply silence. The hope you projected onto inconsistency was the echo of an earlier hope. You were still trying to keep alive. Healing doesn't erase desire, it just removes the illusions that made suffering feel like romance. The final image is simple. Someone standing before a half-open door, realizing the person behind it is not the one they were waiting for. They turn not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. And in that quiet turn, a truth emerges. Love that is meant for you will not require pursuit. It will meet you without running. We often tell ourselves that the reason we want the unavailable is simple. The chase is thrilling, the mystery intoxicating, the uncertainty a spark. It's an easy story to believe because it flatters us. It turns our anxiety into adventure and our longing into preference. But if the chase were truly exciting, it wouldn't come with knots in the stomach, compulsive checking, or the quiet humiliation of waiting for someone who rarely meets us with the same enthusiasm. The emotional charge here isn't pleasure, it's vigilance. Cultural cliches like "people want what they can't have" flatten the experience into something playful, almost romantic. Yet these phrases mask what research consistently shows. Ambiguity amplifies desire, not because we enjoy it, but because the nervous system shifts into hypertensive mode when outcomes are uncertain. The classic experiment by Whitchurch Wilson and Gilbert, Psychological Science, 2011, illustrated this vividly. Participants became more preoccupied with individuals whose level of interest in them was unclear. Uncertainty didn't make them curious, it made them ruminate. In everyday life, this plays out in predictable patterns. A person who replies warmly one day and vanishes the next. Someone who compliments you in private but is distant in public. The late-night message that feels intimate, followed by days of silence. These situations are not tales of attraction. They are cycles of emotional inconsistency that the mind mislabels as chemistry because it has no better explanation. This section invites the viewer to notice how often they've mistaken instability for intensity, not to shame themselves, but to realize that the thrill they were told to chase was never a thrill at all. It was an anxiety response, dressed up as romance, and recognizing that illusion is the first crack in the narrative's armor. But beneath these cultural explanations lies a quieter, older truth that begins far before adult romance. Beneath the surface illusion of liking the chase lies a far older script, one written long before adulthood, in the nervous system's earliest attempts to understand love. The emotional tension here comes from recognition. The uneasy sense that longing for someone elusive feels strangely familiar, as if it echoes a pattern learned long ago. Mary Ainsworth's attachment research demonstrated that children exposed to inconsistent caregiving often develop anxious attachment, organizing their entire emotional world around vigilance and the fear of losing connection. What looks like desire in adulthood is frequently the same vigilance, replayed, not a conscious choice, but a conditioned response. The narration traces this link through the lens of neurobiology. Reward learning studies show that the brain's dopamine system becomes especially activated, not by consistent pleasure, but by unpredictable rewards. The classic reward prediction aerodynamic. When paired with emotional uncertainty, this mechanism transforms inconsistent attention into something that feels potent, urgent, and disproportionately meaningful. Berridge and Robinson's work on incentive salience helps explain why this dynamic feels compulsive. The brain begins to want more intensely than the situation merits. Mistaking unpredictability for value. Human examples make the theory intimate. A child who received affection only after proving themselves may grow into an adult who confuses emotional strain with emotional depth. Someone raised to believe that closeness must be earned will often feel most alive when trying to secure it. Another person, accustomed to sporadic warmth, may experience unpredictability as the natural rhythm of intimacy, not realizing that they are chasing familiarity, not connection. The tone softens here, emphasizing that these patterns are not flaws, but adaptations, strategies the psyche learned to survive conditional forms of love. Longing, in this frame, becomes understandable. A reenactment of unfinished emotional business, an attempt to transform early uncertainty into adult security. And so, the section closes on a quiet truth. The person we pursue is rarely the true object of desire. We are pursuing the moment when an old wound might finally resolve. These early patterns do not disappear. They simply disguise themselves within the machinery of modern connection. In the modern digital landscape, old attachment wounds are no longer confined to private memory. They are mirrored, magnified, and continually reactivated by the devices we hold in our hands. The emotional friction here comes from living in an environment where connection is always available but genuine. Responsiveness is increasingly rare. Intermittent attention, once the byproduct of an inconsistent caregiver, now appears in the form of delayed replies, erratic texting patterns, and the silent theater of someone being online but not responding. The psychological trap deepens because digital platforms are built on the same variable reward architecture that strengthens compulsive behavior. A design pattern ostensibly examined in Adam Alter's Irresistible, which shows how unpredictable feedback increases craving. The narration observes how this plays out in daily rituals. Someone refreshing a messaging app every few minutes, convinced that a reply will arrive any moment. Someone scrolling through an unavailable person's social media activity, searching for signs, cues, or hidden meaning. Someone misinterpreting emotional detachment as confidence, simply because distance looks attractive on a screen. Each behavior reflects not desire for the person, but a neurobiological pursuit of resolution. The brain, waiting for an unpredictable reward that momentarily soothes the unease created by ambiguity. Digital environments intensify this pattern because they offer endless points of analysis. A seen button answered message becomes a psychological cliffhanger. A sudden like on an old photo creates a spike of dopamine, followed by a return to doubt. The very structure of modern communication, typing indicators, read receipts, fluctuating availability, mimics the rhythm of intermittent reinforcement that Berridge and Robinson describe as central to incentive salience mechanisms. Unavailability becomes not just tolerated, but neurologically amplified. In this section, the viewer is invited to see their own habits reflected back at them with quiet honesty. Modern dating apps, though designed for connection, often reward avoidance by granting more perceived value to those who disengage. Meanwhile, individuals sensitive to inconsistency become trapped in a loop of anticipation, disappointment, and renewed pursuit. The result is a culture where longing thrives, not because people are more alluring, but because digital life makes emotional distance feel electrifying, even when it is profoundly destabilizing. Yet even in this intensified landscape, the cycle can shift once we learn to meet the longing rather than obey it. Healing begins in the quiet moment when you realize that longing is not a compass, it's a memory. The pull toward the unavailable isn't evidence of destiny. It is the echo of a nervous system trained to mistake intensity for intimacy. The shift starts when you can name the sensation in your body, that tightening in the chest, that sudden spike of hope, that instinct to chase the moment someone withdraws. Awareness is the first interruption of the old pattern. Research in self-compassion shows that people soften unhealthy attachment cycles, not by suppressing desire, but by meeting themselves with the warmth they once sought from others. When you pause long enough to feel the craving without acting on it, you begin to uncouple urgency from worth. Daniel Siegel's writing on emotional regulation further suggests that the brain rewires through gentle repetition. Each time you resist the lure of inconsistency, you strengthen the pathways that recognize safety as desirable rather than dull. Healing also involves expanding your tolerance for stability. Many people misinterpret calm, consistent affection as boredom simply because it feels unfamiliar. The absence of chaos can be disorienting, when chaos was once the currency of love. So you practice staying with partners who show up, staying with conversations that feel steady, staying with yourself when anxiety rises in the presence of genuine connection. Over time, the discomfort fades, replaced by a quieter, more grounded longing, not for the thrill of uncertainty, but for the ease of reciprocity. The goal is not to silence desire, it is to redirect it, to train the heart to recognize that attraction built on safety is not weaker, merely wiser. And in that shift, the chase finally loses its power. And when the pattern softens, a final realization emerges. One that brings us back to the paradox where we began. Why does the heart run hardest toward the person who keeps walking away? It's a strange choreography. One figure endlessly reaching, the other drifting just out of reach. And yet, it feels impossibly personal, as if the distance itself is calling your name. You tell yourself it's passion or fate or some rare chemistry, but the truth is quieter and far more unsettling. The longing grows strongest where certainty disappears. There's a moment, maybe you know it well, when you stare at your phone at 2 a.m., waiting for a reply that won't come. Logic says you should let go, but your chest tightens, your thoughts loop. And suddenly, the absence feels more intimate than presence ever did. It's as if the mind confuses unpredictability with meaning, attaching weight to every delayed message, every half-hearted smile, every fleeting moment of warmth that vanishes before you can hold it. And so you chase, not because the person is extraordinary, but because the inconsistency is, because somewhere inside, the uncertainty feels familiar. So the question that begins this story is not, why don't they want me? It's something far more revealing. What exactly in me responds so intensely to the ones who stay just out of reach? To understand why this chase grips us so tightly, we first need to examine the comforting stories we tell ourselves about it.